working class must destroy the authority of capitalism, which thrives on private property, profit-driven economies, and the concentration of wealth in the hands of the few. In simple terms, as Marxists, we believe in the authority of the people over the means of production, not the authority of the bourgeoisie over the people and the economy. So, no one commissars and fighters has any ideological basis to call the EFF authoritarian. The very capitalist system we live under thrives through authority, and it is the authority of the few. We must expect an aggressive onslaught from captains of industry and their media puppets. We have seen this especially since we celebrated a decade of existence at FNB Stadium, where we united more than 120,000 people under one roof as a symbol of common purpose and unity we share as a movement. There will be attempts to discredit our achievement as non-existent and disruptive. This is because the agenda is to undermine that which capital does not control. Our duty is to expose this and be consistent in our message that the EFF remains the only incorruptible and uncaptured organization capable of delivering socialism in our lifetime. Chairs, fighters and compatriots, one of our defining ideological features is our commitment to the ideals of Frantz Fanon. There are two aspects of Fanon's work that we must re-emphasize, which must always guide us whenever we seek to understand our role in the post-colonial world. Two chapters of particular significance are from his book, The Wretched of the Earth, The Pitfalls of National Consciousness and on Violence. The chapters are significant because one provides guidance on why liberation movement fail post-liberation, and the other diagnoses the necessity of violence and the inherent violence existing in a colonial and neo-colonial society. If we want to learn from the mistake of those who came before us, Fanon is instructive. He tells us what not to do and what not to become. The problem we confront internally as Africans is the persistence of liberation movement that sustain themselves on blackmail and through the use of law enforcement agencies to suppress the people's demands for the promises of liberation. Most recently, the liberation movement here in South Africa, when faced with getting rid of itself, aligned with our historical enemies in characterizing the EFF as a threat to the nation, because when ideas are lost, blackmail and swart become the strategy. We are told that if the EFF is in government, it will be a doomsday for the people of South Africa. Fanon teaches and illustrates that liberation movements have no potential to lead us into the future. They are preoccupied with reminding our people of the past during every election cycle and periodically through meaningless like celebration of so-called Independence Day. These movements are led by a class of triumphalist politicians who resent the masses and categorize them as ungrateful for the leadership of the liberation movement. The former liberation movement began to build a wall between itself and the masses while impatiently accumulating petty wealth in alliance with the West. Fanon's lessons are important because he shows us how post-liberation national leadership reconstitutes itself as a mediator of capitalist interests, turning the nation into a brothel for imperialists. Fanon reveals that this decay in the relationship between the people and the liberation movement create a political class that no longer relates to the people. This political class loses sight of the continued poverty of the masses and its inability to reconstruct society away from the grip of colonialism. Because of this, the former colonizer tightened its grip over the resources of the former colony through concessions, loans, and other mechanisms that entrenches our underdevelopment and dependency on the West. The national bourgeoisie, also underdeveloped to lead strategic sectors of the economy, turns back to the colonialist and relies on the protection and support of Europeans. Their failure led to the collapse of not only the nation, but also the liberation movement itself. This is what the EFF must always guard against as our presence increases in governance and places of political influence. We must not resent our people because they do not vote for us, even though we fight bitterly for their dignity. We must resist the temptation of crumbs of imperialism, crumbs imperialists leave for the political class, and never forget the genuine purpose of our struggle for liberation. We must avoid accumulating so much personal wealth that the hunger of our people for land, jobs, education, and decent life becomes nothing but slogans we chant to celebrate ourselves. Our reflection on more than a decade of selfless struggle for economic freedom in our lifetime must not become a parade of self-praise or a tool to immobilize our people. It must serve as an occasion to renew our passion and commitment to liberating our people. Fanon writes painfully, I quote, "After a few years, the breakup of the party becomes obvious, and any observer, even the most superficial, can notice that the party, today the skeleton of its former selves, only served to immobilize the people. The party, which during the battle had drawn itself the whole nation, is now falling apart. The party is becoming a means of private advancements." Close quote. We must hold Fanon's prophecy close to our hearts to ensure that the economic emancipation movement fulfills its strategic mission for economic freedom in our lifetime. Comrades, these are internal contradictions we must avoid to ensure that we do not betray the mandate of liberation. This is a self-reflective diagnosis that we must internalize as we enter a second decade of struggle, so we do not use our history of resistance or the external pressure of imperialism as an excuse to avoid accountability to the revolutionary expectations of our people or to interest self-interest and corruption. The second of Fanon's insight that we must hold close to our heart is his assertion that decolonization is always a violent phenomenon. This is critical for a militant organization like ours, because we are tasked with reawakening the consciousness of a society convinced of the possibility of reconciliation without justice. The EFF exists in a country indoctrinated to believe that the contradictions between the African black majority and the white capitalist ruling class can be resolved peacefully, and that violence in any form must be avoided and condemned. This belief is simply untrue. We must explain this truth to our people. When the South African Human Rights Commission takes us to court for saying that ultimately our revolution will require us to kill, we must be prepared to contextualize what we mean. When the Human Rights Commission and the racist lobby group take us to court for declaring that we are in a war with white supremacy, we must be able to explain to our people what black consciousness is and why it cannot coexist with the idea that white people are inherently superior and one of the two must die. Fanon is important here because he gives us the tools to explain to our people that the conditions within which they live are violent. It is violence to segregate African people into underdeveloped townships and villages without services. It is violence for a white minority to have complete control over the means of production in Africa. It is violence that the majority of the land remains in the hands of a white minority. Colonialism is institutional and structural violence, and reversing it requires violence. Changing legislation to allow for land expropriation without compensation is a form of organized violence against the white supremacy, but this violence is rooted in justice. Our message is simple. There cannot be unity and reconciliation in South Africa without justice, and justice will be violent for those who are comfortable at the expense of African people. Ultimately, there will be a need to take up arms, as this is the eventual outcome of all struggles against injustice met with resistance. This conclusion arises because the white capitalist class feels entitled to the wealth and resources they accumulated through crime and will violently defend their right to exploit and oppress African people. In the face of this arrogance, violence is inevitable. This is what we must coherently and logically explain to our people. Decolonization questions the colonial situation, casts into doubt, and makes the native an active participant in reshaping the world order. Decolonization is a substitution and radical reorganization of society wherein the last shall be first and the first shall be last. As Fanon tells us, this process demands that we prepare for violence at any stage because it is impossible to transform society born out of and sustained by violence without violence itself. Colonialism was born from the blood, suffering, slavery, destruction of Africans and African identity. Without the violent subjugation of Africans, the colonial system ceased to exist. Our people being denied education is violence. Our people living in shacks is violence. Our people working in mines for little wages while enriching global capitalists is violence. The erasure of our history is violence. The fact that labor such as domestic work, gardening, and security services are reserved for Africans in service to white people is violence. The fact that a white child's first encounter with an African is often as a servant is violent. The entire existence of Africans is imagined through the eyes of the colonizer. And to radically change this and reimagine ourselves through our own eyes and tradition will be a violent process. Fanon's concepts of the two zones of reality, where the town of the European is filled with tarred roads and lies, while the lands of the native is filled with poverty and overcrowding, perfectly describes South Africa's violent social and economic situation today, which must be transformed. These are the realities we must explain to our people. We must show them how abnormal their situation is so that the prospects of violence does not offend them. Our people must never be offended by violence because their very existence is a manifestation of violence. Commissars and fighters, alongside internal contradictions, we must consider the external challenges that threaten the revolutionary project for African independence. These challenges are posed by imperialism and neocolonialism. Many liberal thinkers like to credit the failures and collapse of African states to the leadership style of African leaders, blaming socialist and anti-imperialist policies. Imperialist and so-called governance experts argue that African economies fail because independent states resist the anarchy of the markets, constantly calling for increased privatization as a solution to our economic problems. By anarchy of the markets, we mean the capitalist class and its proponents want democratically elected states to allow policy direction and economies to be dictated by invisible hand known as the independent market. This market downgrades and rates economies based on whether they are investor-friendly according to their narrow political, social, and economic preferences. The market manipulates prices and encourages collusion by the private sector to maximize profits regardless of the impact on ordinary people. This capitalist madness, which ignores the basic needs of the people, is a breeding ground for corruption. Resistant to this disorganized and undemocratic system through decisive state intervention and planned economy is dismissed as an authoritarianism. Imperialist nations propagate these arguments to mask their role in Africa's underdevelopment and to legitimize capitalist hegemony. They assume that the only valid form of governance is Western-oriented authority, while attacking non-Western systems as inherently flawed. As Marxists, we must understand that our problems are from global capitalism and its advanced manifestation, imperialism. To dismantle this system, we must first understand Marxism, the concept of authority, and why global capitalism mobilizes itself against alternative ways of organizing the economy. Delegates, another question we must respond to and reflect on is the question of unity. Fighters, there has been a much debate and discussions across our nation about the cause of black unity and unity amongst the progressive forces. As part of the preparations for this Third National People's Assembly, we were questioned by our own branches as to what constitutes a progressive forces. We must have a coherent response to our own branches as to what continues to motivate certain alliances we have in society. But for the interest of defining our political moment, we must define what characterizes the progressive left in South Africa. To merely say you are progressive does not mean you are progressive. To merely state that you are on the left or that you are black conscious does not make you leftist or black conscious. To belong to these categories is proven through action, through ideological persuasion, through practice. Black unity and has always been imperative in South Africa, but blackness should not be used as a shield for opportunism or to escape one's own wrongdoing. The disparate need for black solidarity must not be taken advantage of by individuals who manipulate the black identity to avoid accounting for how they have jeopardized the cause of black liberation. There are forces in South Africa today who have discovered the cause of black unity after they previously undermined it while they were in power, and this discovery is manipulative. You as delegate must ask yourself, where was this black consciousness and black unity when the Marikana workers were killed? Whose blood nourished the birth of this economic emancipation movement, while the so-called new leaders of black unity were sitting as state president and even justified the killing of mine workers in Marikana, who were all, by the way, black. Did the need for black unity not exist when the youth of this country were shot, jailed, and killed for demanding free education under the new messiah of black unity? When the EFF offered its 6% in parliament to amend the Constitution of South Africa to expropriate land without compensation, and this was rejected by the former liberation movement, where was the black unity then? Fighters, we must never allow black consciousness to be misused to con our people into forgetting, nor allow it to sanitize the legacy of failure and corruption. There are individuals who committed themselves to undermining the liberation of black people while in government and now, in an attempt to rescue their legacy of compromise and collaboration as head of state, director generals, CEOs of strategic state-owned enterprises. They reach for black consciousness as they approach their grave. When they were fresh, they didn't know black unity. Now they see the grave, they see black unity. It is our revolutionary responsibility to vehemently reject black unity born out of convenience and opportunism, to tell those who live lives of betrayal while they govern, that Steve Biko will not welcome them on the other side because they are non-white and agents of capital. Black consciousness is a political conviction that not only relies on the color of your skin, but also on your consciousness itself. You can be black, yet advance divisive politics of tribalism. You can be black, yet act as an agent of white supremacy and corruption. You may identify as black, but your character can still be defined by deception and dishonesty. You can be black and still sell out your brothers and sisters for a few pieces of silver. We, as the EFF, do not subscribe to unity based on skin color alone in our pursuit for liberation. We subscribe to a political unity defined by ideological conviction and honest politics, a unity that will bring about the defeat of our strategic enemy. Our enemy knows that it is the EFF that is the true liberation movement and not a pocket knife for individuals and self-gratification. In our history, we have never betrayed our people. As a result, we do not merely claim to be the home and inspiration of black people and black unity. We have earned this role. It is the flag and the logo of the EFF that strike fear into the hearts of the white capitalist establishment. This is because we have earned the fear of the enemy. For this, we must be proud. The EFF is not in a fight for its own survival, but because we already live in the hearts and minds of our people. We are now in a fight to defend the cause of liberation from losing legitimacy because criminals want to use ideology as a weapon of self-defense. If we allow the politics we subscribe to be delegitimized by criminals masquerading as messiahs of black unity, it will take decades of the left to regain credibility, and right-wingers and capitalists will rule us for centuries to come. Our triple task as revolutionaries today, as we rebuild, defend, and advance the struggle for economic freedom, are to combat liberalism, revisionism, and opportunism. We must not allow opportunists to reverse history, nor ideology to die at the hands of liberalism while we live through the brutality and reactionary rule of those who preach black unity. Ideology must never be used as a tool to wipe away the practical failures of those who have led this country. We must defend Steve Biko, even in his grave, from being used by syndicates that serve individualism. Fighters, one thing we must be proud of as this National People's Assembly is that the majority of the delegate is women in this conference, which proves our commitment to allowing women to be at the center of political decision-making in the EFF. Out of 2,513 delegates, women delegates from their branches. Out of 2,513 delegates, 1,685 women are nominated as delegates from their branches, while 828 males were nominated. Fellow fighters, this organic representation of women in our conference is a sign that the narrative that the EFF does not appeal to women can no longer stand. 66% of delegates to this conference are women because the EFF is an organization that has begun to appeal to women, and these women form part of the highest decision-making body of the EFF in their majority. The EFF subscribes to the notion of Thomas Sankara, wherein he states that, I quote, "There is no true social revolution without the liberation of women. May my eyes never see and my feet never take me to a society where half the people are held in silence. I hear the roar of women's silence. I sense the rumble of their storm and feel the anger of their revolt. Close quote. Our nation is one where women live in permanent fear and silence, where women are murdered, undermined, and subjected to triple oppression, where they are oppressed because they are black, they are poor, and they are women. The participation of women, therefore, at this level, is not something to be taken lightly, because women must lead their own emancipation. We want to salute the branches of the EFF for not paying lip service to the women's struggle by electing them to determine the future of our movement and our nation. Comrade delegates, as part of holding ourselves accountable and tracing what we committed to do as this leadership elected at the Second National People's Assembly in 2019, we must reflect on the resolution made at the conference and account for what has been achieved. In instances where there have been resolutions that have not been implemented, we must stand here honestly and explain what the material challenges were. It is this NPA that must resolve on what is to be done to ensure that these ideas are achieved. Delegates to the Third National People's Assembly, part of the resolution on the land question on the Second National People's Assembly was that even though other political parties support the concept of land expropriation without compensation, they do so for completely different reasons, and reasons that may be against the ideals the EFF stands for. It was therefore resolved that the EFF must object to any amendment to the Constitution that will not result in the fundamental restructuring of the property rights regime in the country. Furthermore, the Second National People's Assembly resolved that the EFF must object to any amendment to the Constitution that will entrench the status quo and produce superficial changes. It was therefore on the basis of this resolution that we, as the EFF, after fearless participation in Parliament and numerous bilateral meetings with the former liberation movement, rejected the proposed amendment to Section 25 of the Constitution intended to entrench compensation for land expropriation and willing buyer, willing seller in the Constitution. We rejected this. This amendment was a distortion of the original EFF motion as it pertained to compensation and custodianship, as the former liberation movement remained committed to a failed restitution process that is premised on compensation and title deeds as opposed to state custodianship. Delegates, in terms of the resolution regarding broadcasting and the media terrain, the EFF second NPA resolved that there must be the immediate removal of Section 60, subsection 3 of the mass carry requirements altogether from the Electronic Communications Act. There should also be an amendment to the Electronic Communications Act in a way that allows the SABC to freely negotiate retransmission consents agreements on commercial terms with other players in South Africa and internationally. As I stand before you today, after the hard work of the EFF in Parliament, it was on the 1st of April 2022 that the Independent Communication Authority of South Africa, ICASA, amended the mass carry regulation, and they now require subscription broadcasters to carry the public broadcasters' channels, subject to commercially negotiable terms. The EFF was at the forefront of correcting a historical wrong that had given subscription broadcasters the right to carry SABC channels at no cost since the enforcement of the mass carry regulations in 2008. Delegates of the Third National People's Assembly, in 2019, it was resolved that the EFF establish alternative broadcast, radio, print media to guard against negative characterization of socialist ideas and the left in general. Seated here today, the EFF has its own state-of-the-art studios at Winnie Madikizela Mandela House, wherein we record our own weekly podcast. We remain the only political party to have established its own consistent podcast platform. Delegates seated here today, the EFF has its own newsletter, The Radical Voice, which publishes the work of the EFF in all spheres of government and reflects on both internal and external political phenomena. Fellow fighters, it was the EFF that resolved that South Africa should direct its focus to primary health care and build a caring system that provides comprehensive, educational, accessible, and community-based care that meets the health needs of individuals throughout their lives. Furthermore, to this, we resolved in the second NPA that the 6th Parliament should finalize the National Health Amendment Bill to ensure clinics are open 24 hours. Today, we can report to you that the EFF has indeed fought in Parliament that clinics must operate 24 hours, and this was rejected by the former liberation movement, which was also rejected itself on 29 May 2024. We did not allow this to be an obstacle. However, through our MMC of Health in Johannesburg, we have opened Orchards Clinic here in Johannesburg, a state-of-the-art facility that operates 24/7 to demonstrate that it is indeed both practical and possible to have clinics open 24 hours, 7 days a week. Fighters, as part of our 7 non-negotiable cardinal pillars, we reaffirmed our posture on the nationalization of the South African Reserve Bank and placing it under the direct ownership and management of the state. Further to this, the second NPA resolved that we must call for the expansion of the South African Reserve Bank's mandate to use monetary policy to boost employment and increase capital available in the economy. Comrades, I can report proudly as I stand before you today that through the efforts of the EFF, the 7th Parliament is currently looking at ways in which we can nationalize the Reserve Bank and expand its mandate. Public hearings are being hosted as part of the process of ultimately reclaiming the sovereignty of our currency and our fiscal policy. Comrades, as leadership collective, we were mandated to continue to expose, reject, and campaign against independent power producers, IPPs, who signed contracts with Eskom to generate electricity and sell it back to Eskom. To this day, it is only the EFF that waged a massive protest against Eskom in 2020, demanding an end to load shedding and, amongst other things, calling for an end to the parasitic role of IPPs at Eskom. Fellow fighters, the second NPA mandates us to continue to call for an end to the occupation of Palestine by apartheid Israel, to call for the complete isolation of Israel by South Africa. In all international bodies, apartheid Israel should not be allowed to participate in international sporting platforms such as World Cup, the Olympics, and other international sporting code. To heed this mandate, it is the EFF that marched to the Israeli embassy calling for its closure because we cannot host genocidal nations that murder women and children, bomb hospitals, and target sites of religious worship. We went further and proposed a motion in the 6th Parliament of South Africa calling for the expulsion of the Israeli embassy and the cutting of all ties with Israel. A motion supported by a majority of members of Parliament and adopted by the National Assembly. Your cowardly president of South Africa, who speaks with forked tongues on the genocide against Palestine, has to this day not implemented the resolution which was successfully passed in Parliament. Comrades, the second NPA rejected the Mswati regime and demanded that that regime must end with immediate effect. It was this second NPA that mandated us to go and close the borders of Eswatini in rejecting Mswati's regime. It was from this rallying call that the EFF protested at all border gates connecting South Africa and Eswatini in solidarity with the calls for democracy in Eswatini. We have gone as far as supporting the liberation movements such as the EFF Eswatini and Pudemo, and will continue to do so until the regime of Mswati falls in memory of Mario Masuku, former president of Pudemo, and Nombulela Mota, the first president of the EFF Eswatini. Fighters, it was the EFF and the Second National People's Assembly which called for all correctional services facilities and programs to be managed by government and not private corporations or companies. Following the escape of Thabo Bester, it was the EFF that came out strongly against the control of Mangaung Correctional Center by Israeli-linked G4S and pushed for the announcement that the public-private partnership to run this prison must come to an end. To this day, G4S controls this prison, and we must intensify the call for this relationship to completely end now. With all these successes, fighters, some resolutions have not been met, including the resolution to establish a school named Winnie Madikizela Mandela Comprehensive School. This delay is as a result of disruptive COVID-19 pandemic and the incompetence of the municipality. However, we can assure you, fighters, that the land for the school has been secured, the architecture has been developed, and even some of the journalists seated here today have been to the farm where the school will be built. They can also confirm that the work is ongoing. Commissars, we must additionally acknowledge that the resolution to form a women's command has not been fulfilled as the challenges of COVID-19 almost completely closed the EFF's ability to operate normally as an organization. As a result, we had to focus on rebuilding and organizing ourselves again. All the resolutions taken by the second NPA must be revisited, and this third NPA must take a decision on a way forward. It is the duty of this third NPA to either reaffirm their necessity or determine that what is to be done. The Secretary General will provide a detailed report on the implementation of resolutions of the Second National People's Assembly. Delegates, the EFF has for over a decade remained the organization that has confronted existing conditions in South Africa and brought light to the issues that have for the longest time been kept under the rug, such as the need to expropriate land without compensation, the need to crush the remains of the legacy of colonialism and apartheid. Over the past 5 years, the organization has, amongst other things, called for the unsealing of CR17 documents which were wrongly sealed in the name of accountability and mobilized the working class, calling on South Africans to participate in the public hearing of land expropriation without compensation. In the history of South African politics, no organization has emerged as a prominent voice consistently championing the rights of the black working class and the economically dispossessed through its various programs of action. Fighters, on the 13th to the 16th of December 2019, delegates from branches across the country gathered here at the Nazareth Expo Center under the theme Consolidating the Grounds Towards Socialist Power for the organization's Second National People's Assembly. These 3,100 delegates who attended the Second National People's Assembly had an organizational obligation to reflect on the policy position of our organization, re-strategize and reposition it to provide solution to the problems confronting South Africa, the continent and the world. And as such, gave the new leadership a mandate for the next 5 years. In the next following weeks, a successful Second National People's Assembly, a plenum was convened in February 2020, which adopted the program of the year, as well as the theme of the year being the year of action against racist financial sector. This came from the undertaking that the lack of transformation in the economy, the lack of jobs, and as the privatization of state-owned enterprises such as Eskom will further impoverish our people. More than 90.5% of total banking sector assets are controlled by the top 5 banks such as Standard Bank, FNB, Absa, Capitec, Nedbank, and all of which are white-owned. The same is true of the insurance sector and many other sectors of the country. Moreover, there are more than 8.1 million young people between the ages of 15 to 34 who are supposed to be transitioning from dependency to becoming independent, productive members of society, adding value to the country's GDP, but are not in education, training, or employment. The year of action against the racist financial sector also marked 7 years of the organization's existence, allowing it to evolve into a reliable, genuine, and credible movement of hope for our people. However, it must be noted that this was during a critical moment in the history of our country and the world, as we witnessed the surge of coronavirus pandemic, a pandemic that resulted in sickness and death of many, both domestically and abroad. This COVID-19 outbreak led to the cancellation of many of the organization's programs and tested the strength and survival of the EFF, as circumstances forced us to adopt conditions that were against our usual way of doing things. Fellow fighters, we navigated this through collective wisdom of organization, which provided solutions and showed its capacity to influence the political landscape on what needed to be done, doing so with conviction. Amidst this global crisis, the organization's character as the last hope of the people was successfully maintained through active engagement in organizational activism such as online membership system, virtual meetings, and the EFF Book Club. It was during this period that the organization donated 15 million to the COVID-19 Solidarity Fund as a result of a dedicated and disciplined EFF representatives who sacrificed a third of their salaries to contribute to the fight against the spread of COVID-19. The time then came to fight against the power of white monopoly in our country. We called upon all formations on the left, from trade unions to community organizations, to embark on a national march to the Eskom headquarters. The march denounced load shedding, the privatization of Eskom, and state-owned enterprises. Eskom was a significant threat to the fiscus and the South African economy. Its collapse would have led to the unimaginable failure of the country. Following the anti-black racism displayed by the pharmaceutical outlet Clicks in a racist advert, the EFF embarked on a direct action at Clicks stores nationwide to demand accountability and confronted racism. It is now commonplace for the oppressed, whether at school, whether at work, whether in business, to call on the EFF for intervention when confronted with racism, as was the case with Clicks. At all material times, we condemn racism and provide cogent accounts, pillars of our organization. As such, a clarion call was made to stand in defense of the judiciary and state asset against racist right-wing groups in Senegal in Free State Province. In 2021, the world continued battling the invisible enemy called coronavirus, raising questions of relevance, decisiveness, and leadership regarding our revolutionary organization. This period tested the character of the organization as the public sought empirical and workable solutions to their problems. As an organization, we reflected on organizational, domestic, and international challenges and took concrete resolution to guide the economic emancipation movement in the period ahead. Despite the senseless lockdowns imposed by the government, which closed the political landscape and prohibited accountability and campaigning activities, even during an election year, we carried our programs. One of the wars that the organization successfully engaged in was against vaccine apartheid, where we demonstrated in the march to save lives at the South African Health Products Regulatory Authority offices, also highlighting the failure of government's vaccination program, the loyalty of government to vaccine producers aligned to capitalism and the West, the capture of SAPRA, and the demand for CoronaVac vaccine produced by Sinovac and the Sputnik V vaccine from Russia. Our correct conviction was that it is only through scientifically tested and proven vaccines that the world could permanently contain the spread of the coronavirus. Fighters, it was through the march to save lives at SAPRA that a few days later, CoronaVac vaccine was authorized for distribution in South Africa, demonstrating that we are the only organization that prioritizes our people. This one, it will need what? The one I'm about to deal with. Chairs, fighters. Fighters. The integrity of our judiciary is paramount, and we may be critical of our judiciary at times, but we must protect the ideas of the rule of law and the constitutional supremacy, especially in a volatile situation, even if it means paying a visit to try and convince a former president to comply with the Constitutional Court and the Zondo Commission. The rule of law in South Africa is applied selectively, and a section of judiciary is co-opted. Despite this, an intervention needed to be made when there was an ill-advised decision to arrest the former state president, and in an attempt to plead with him to comply with the directive of the Zondo Commission, we visited him at his home state. We did so publicly and transparently during the day. This was necessary because at the time we foresaw the bloodshed to come, which could come in the former state president's name, and we knew that this was avoidable. It is unfortunate that our plea fell on deaf ears and that today our intervention is misrepresented as part of some political ploy gone wrong. We, as the EFF, will never associate with individuals who have stolen government money and resources for their own benefit, nor will we ever associate with any faction in any political party. Our interest at the time was to protect innocent lives that will be lost, and for attempting to do this, we regret nothing, because we did it out of love for the people, for our people and the nation of South Africa. Fighters and commissars, our distinguished guests, I'm happy to report that we were vindicated when the former president was arrested, and his arrest led to the 21 July 2021 unrest and senseless killings of black people. Had our intervention succeeded, the tragic loss of black life massacred in Phoenix and other parts of KwaZulu-Natal could have been prevented. Superior logic. Fighters, we have reflected on the importance of internal democracy, and consistent with this, we have convened branch people's assemblies and presided over 52 regional people's assemblies across South Africa. The Central Command team resolved that prior to the 2021 local government elections, all EFF regions must convene regional people's assembly to elect regional leadership and adopt localized election campaign programs that resonate with the EFF election victory manual adopted by the CCT, endorsed by the plenum. If we were dictators, we would not have held these organizational programs and activities. We would have ignored the principle of elected leadership and simply held on to power. However, because we genuinely believe in democratically elected leadership, we continued with these programs. The majority of programs were carried out successfully despite the conditions at the time, such as the senseless and poorly managed lockdowns by the government and the closed political landscape. The year 2022 marked 9 years since the formation of the EFF, where the CCT resolved on a campaign to recruit 1 million active and dependable members under the theme, Year of the Branch. This was also a means to raise the political consciousness of the people while ensuring the EFF is represented in every corner of South Africa. The campaign was officially launched on the 18th of February at Hector Peterson Square in Soweto. As part of the program, all EFF branches, sub-regions, regions, and provinces were given their own targets on the voting population and past performances. Before the end of December 2022, all regions and provinces reached their targets with a total of 1,085,843 paid-up members in good standing, exceeding the target by more than 85,000. Leaders and members of the EFF across all structures, this massive victory was made possible by your dedication and commitment. As we speak now, the EFF has verifiable membership across the length and breadth of our country. Fighters, the campaign of the Year of the Branch ran at the same time as the third provincial people's assemblies, which elected new leaders and adopted a program of action. Following the electoral decline of votes and seats in Limpopo, the CCT resolved to disband the Limpopo Provincial Command Team, all regional command team, and branch command teams to rebuild all constitutional structures and recruit members towards the Provincial People's Assembly. On the 24th of January, we convened an 2022, we convened an induction of all public representatives. The induction was attended by the leadership from various structures and more than 1,100 public representatives, including 1,066 councillors across South Africa. The public representatives deliberated on the founding manifesto of the EFF, revolutionary code of discipline, and code of conduct for all caucuses and public representatives, and were made to understand the responsibility entrusted to them by the people. The need to accelerate the call for the expropriation of land without compensation remains key. This is why we led a confrontation of Johan Rupert in his properties in Stellenbosch, demanding the return of our land and exposing his influence over the economic and political scene of our country. We picketed with our opposition parties in September 2022 after the acting public protector failed to release the Phala report. Chapter 9 institutions must never be allowed to be co-opted into factional and crime-hiding activities to the extent of protecting an individuals. Our organization has been fighting for the Pan-African Parliament to mold itself into an institution with legislative authority across the continent. We also advocated for the principle of rotation at the Pan-African Parliament, which resulted in Chief Fortune Charombira, a member of parliament from Zimbabwe, being elected as the president of the Pan-African Parliament and the first leader from the SADC region. The year 2023, 10 years since the formation of the EFF, a remarkable achievement that is a testament to the ideological and organizational strength of this economic emancipation movement. It was a year marked as the year of massive political education and voter registration. This deliberate effort was taken to convert the quantitative strength of the EFF into quality through mass-based political education to ensure that all 1 million members of the EFF understand and comprehend the policies of our organization and are able to advance and defend the agenda of economic freedom in our lifetime. We also understood that the electoral victory of the EFF, as well as the integrity and the sustainability of the democratic project in South Africa, is dependent on the elimination of voter apathy. Moreover, it was now the time for our organization to create its own voter population ahead of the 2024 national and provincial government elections. The launch of the mass voter registration campaign took place in April 2023 at Diepsloot, an area with the highest number of unregistered eligible voters. We started the year with a decisive victory in the by-election in Ward 10 in Polokwane, Limpopo. The victory in Ward 10, coupled with a remarkable increase in votes for the EFF in Ward 17 in Blouberg municipality. Limpopo from 302, Ward 17 in Blouberg municipality in Limpopo, from 302 votes to 953, further painted the promising picture of the rebuilding process in Limpopo. Over the past 10 years, the organization has exceptionally grown, reaching a stage where we are ready to govern. One of the ways this was demonstrated was through the Andries Tatana cleanup campaign, launched in February 2023. This campaign was named after a fearless community activist who was brutally killed by the ruling party for protesting and demanding water, electricity, sanitation, and service delivery in Ficksburg, Free State in April 2011. As a revolutionary and responsible movement of the people of South Africa, we engaged in the following activities. After the revelation of millions of dollars stuffed at Palapala farm, we wrote questions to Cyril Ramaphosa in Parliament, requesting him to explain the source of the money and to disclose any other millions hidden in his property. We further sought to hold Ramaphosa accountable for presiding over the collapse of South Africa during the State of the Nation address in February 2023. We engaged the South African Reserve Bank, the South African Revenue Services, the financial intelligence, and all relevant structures, demanding that Ramaphosa be held accountable. Our organization approached the courts of South Africa to compel Parliament to conduct a thorough and transparent investigation into all the crimes committed by Cyril Ramaphosa with the aim of building a solid case for impeachment. We also approached political parties in Parliament to engage in motion of no confidence against Cyril Ramaphosa as President of South Africa. An independent panel led by former Constitutional Court Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo, appointed by the Speaker of the National Assembly, found that the President had a case to answer. When the National Assembly resolved to ignore the independent panel report and its finding, we approached the Constitutional Court to challenge this decision as irrational and abdication of its constitutional obligation to hold the President accountable. The matter was heard by the Constitutional Court last month, and the judgment is reserved. For as long as the EFF exists, Palapala will not die until the person in the office of the President today is arrested and appears before a court of law. It is a matter of when, not if it will happen, because it is going to happen. Fighters, We further planned a national shutdown due to rising cost of living for all South Africans, the rising levels of unemployment and poverty, increasing levels of crime, particularly murder and gender-based violence, rising levels of corruption, lack of service delivery, and collapsing public infrastructure, particularly hospitals and roads. Former liberation movement's decision to close down coal power station without consultation with the people of South Africa. The Pala Pala scandal involving numerous criminal activities. The national shutdown called for the immediate end to the load shedding and the resignation of Cyril Ramaphosa, sending a clear message to the sitting government that enough is enough. In the past 5 years, we refused to fold our arms and turn a blind eye when the living conditions of our people continue to deteriorate, with the increasing price of food, transport, and electricity pushing many deeper into poverty. This national shutdown was the most revolutionary act. We successfully shut down the economy and brought many towns and cities across the country to a standstill, demonstrating the collective power of the people. The national shutdown was made possible by the unwavering commitment and hard work of our commissars and ground forces, who mobilized communities, organized actions that shook the foundation of the establishment. Today, we are vindicated as we witnessed over 250 days without electricity blackouts, a decision to stop the premature closure of coal power stations, ensuring a more stable energy supply. We are proud that it was the EFF shutdown that stopped the load shedding in South Africa, and no one can doubt us. These victories are not incidental. They are a tangible outcome of the EFF's national shutdown. Our organization also celebrated its 10th anniversary at the FNB Stadium on the 29th of July 2023 in what was the biggest ever festival of the poor. Thousands flocked to the stadium, and society bore witness to a celebration that re-energized our movement towards the liberation of Africans from the chains of humiliation, landlessness, and oppression under the theme, 10 years of unbroken struggle. This led up to the Festival of the Poor, included celebratory events such as visits to old age homes, orphanages, disability centers, the traveling play titled Luruo that was viewed across all 9 provinces, the 10th anniversary exhibition, the launch of the 5th Jazz Hour album, the commemorative walk, EFF Carnival, and public lecture, the 10th anniversary celebration, birthday celebration in Marikana, the gala dinner, and the diplomatic breakfast. It must be noted that no other political party has dared to attempt what we achieved at the FNB Stadium. We extend our gratitude to all councillors and public representatives who demonstrated unwavering discipline and adhered to the directive of the leadership by bringing buses filled with ground forces to the FNB Stadium. It is their collective commitment, dedication, and tireless efforts that made this historic gathering possible, showcasing the strength and unity of our revolutionary movement. Comrade fighters, the parliamentary work of the EFF stands as a testament to our unwavering commitment to the struggle for economic freedom, accountability, and justice for all South Africans. Since its inception, the unwavering commitment to the struggle for economic freedom, accountability, and justice for all South Africans. Since its inception, the EFF has worked tirelessly to ensure that Parliament becomes a site of genuine representation, robust debate, and decisive action to address the pressing issues facing our people. Between 2019 and the present, The EFF has demonstrated its position as the qualitative official opposition, even when not numerically dominant. We have transformed Parliament into a platform where the voices of the oppressed are amplified, where the executive is held accountable, where progressive ideas take center stage. Our interventions has made Parliament accessible to the people, ensuring it addresses their lived realities. While the former liberation movement abused its majority to block progressive reforms, the EFF consistently pushed for legislation that reflects aspirations of the people. We spearheaded efforts to amend Section 25 of the Constitution to allow the expropriation of land without compensation, a cornerstone of the economic emancipation struggle. Despite reactionary neoliberal forces hijacking the process by diluting the proposed amendment, the EFF maintained its principled stance, rejecting any compromise that fell short of full state custodianship of the land. Governance has been at a critical focus of the EFF's parliamentary work through its elected representative in parliament, provincial legislatures, and municipal councils. The EFF has conducted rigorous oversight on the executive, ensuring that the interests of the people remain paramount. During the global COVID-19 pandemic, when governance structures were disrupted, the EFF adopted to ensure that oversight continues unabated. Our members of parliament secured special permits to conduct inspections on public health facilities, exposing government's failures in managing the crisis. We demanded accountability for the widespread corruption in COVID-19 procurement processes, ensuring that the looters of public funds were brought to public scrutiny. The EFF introduced and supported progressive legislation that seeks to transform the socio-economic landscape of South Africa. Key amongst this is the National Health Amendment Bill, aimed at ensuring clinics remain open 24 hours a day, improved access to healthcare. While the bill was rejected by the liberation movement with an excuse of fiscal constraints, the discussions about 24-hour clinics found expression in the highest legislative office in the country. Other legislative initiatives have included the South African Reserve Bank Amendment Bill, which seeks to nationalize the central bank, and the Student Cancellation Bill, aimed at alleviating the financial burden of young people pursuing higher education. Although met with resistance, this effort underscores the EFF's commitment to putting the needs of the people above neoliberal austerity measures. The EFF has been unrelenting in exposing corruption and mismanagement at the highest level of government, from the Pala Farm scandal implicating the person in the office of the president to the maladministration in parliament itself. The EFF held those in power accountable. When the Speaker of the National Assembly was implicated in corruption, the EFF led the calls for her resignation, vindicated when charges were eventually laid against her. Fellow fighters, our parliamentary work has also confronted the systematic failure of the justice system, the collapse of state-owned entities, and the neglect of public infrastructure. We have consistently called for the reopening of Komati Power Station and demanded the funding for the maintenance of Eskom's fleet, exposing the sabotage of state-owned enterprises to advance private sector interests. The EFF has defended the Constitution from attacks by reactionary forces seeking to undermine the democratic gains made since 1994. We have opposed attempts to weaken parliamentary processes, including the decision to relocate Parliament to inadequate facilities following the fire in 2022. Our call for the relocation of Parliament to Tshwane remains rooted in the principle of aligning legislative and administrative functions for greater efficiency. The EFF parliamentary work extends beyond the confines of legislatures. Through public hearings, submissions, and direct engagements with communities, the EFF has ensured that the voices of the marginalized are heard. We have mobilized support for the Basic Educational Law Amendment Bill, Bella Bill, fighting against those who seek to use language as a barrier to access state-funded schools. Similarly, our engagements with artists, creative, and legal experts on the Copyright Amendment Bill has positioned the EFF as a defender of cultural and intellectual rights. Delegates and the people of South Africa, the last time we addressed a gathering of this nature in 2019, we made an honest and objective assessment. The EFF had not built adequate internal capacity to win municipal ward-based elections. We raised this as a huge challenge because municipal elections are partially ward-based. We acknowledged that we needed to build capacity to win wards in order to win municipalities. South Africa's 5th municipal elections, held on the 1st of November 2021, were the movement's 2nd municipal elections. Despite our honest and objective assessment in 2019 about the need to build adequate internal capacity, the 2021 municipal election took place under trying and difficult circumstances. While South Africa, Africa and the world were contending with the COVID-19 pandemic, unimaginable loss of life, disruptive livelihoods, and an economic crisis, we had to contend with municipal elections. Fellow fighters, soon after this second Central Command team was elected in December 2019, starting on the 26th of March 2020, no more than 3 months later, the country went into lockdown, entering alert level 5. This was the most stringent level of the national lockdown, meaning that all political party activities were prohibited. We had to close our offices, cancel all activities, mobilize programs, and adapt to unprecedented reality. This was our reality for the most of 2020 and 2021, as the government implemented different levels of lockdown. We spent much of this time attending funerals of loved ones, friends, fighters, while still having to think about elections. It was under these conditions that we had to plan for the 2021 municipal election. The first election date was announced in April 2021, and we're told that election will take place on the 27th of October 2021. However, the COVID-19 pandemic proved to be unpredictable, which led to the change in the date of the elections. Eventually, the government announced in September 2021 that election will take place on the 1st of November 2021. This effectively meant that the Central Command team, without any meaningful interaction with structures of the organization or members, had no more than 41 days to establish election structures. Commissars and fighters, we remind you of this important background because it is this very context, together with our honest and objective assessment about the absence of internal capacity to win municipal wards, that we must keep in our minds to understand and assess the performance of our organization in 2021 municipal elections. We relied on the spirits, commitment, and dedication of fighters and ground forces, as well as the experience of the 2014-2019 national and provincial election and the 2016 municipal elections to contest against 324 political parties, including independent candidates, for more than 10,000 municipal seats across all 257 municipalities. We contested all 4,468 municipal wards and received more than 3.2 million votes. Not only did we maintain our 2016 electoral support, but more importantly, we increased it. It was these votes that gave us a total of 1,066 municipal council seats, increasing the organization seats from increasing organizational seats by 240. While this was not what we hoped for, we increased the number of ward seats we won from 11 in 2016 to 19. Comrades, it was the 2021 municipal election that marked the first time since the dawn of democracy that the former liberation movement lost its electoral majority and fell below 50% in an election. As we said, it is not going to get better for the liberation movement. It is this performance that solidified the EFF's place in South Africa's political landscape. It is this performance that silenced the doomsayers who claimed that our 2016 electoral success was fluke. It is this performance that sent the strong message: the EFF is indeed a government in waiting. Fellow fighters, it is this performance that solidified the EFF as a national party, not a tribalistic party or a cultural group, not a regionalistic party confined to one province, not a racist party serving the interest of white people, not a sexist, patriarchal party dominated by men at leadership level. You will find fighters and ground forces in Musina in Limpopo, in Malalani in Mpumalanga, in Ropani in Northwest, in Appington in Saldanha, in Appington in Saldanha, in Kabeja in Lusikisiki, in Korobeni, in Kwa Dukuza, and in Matungulo near the border between South Africa and Mozambique in KwaZulu-Natal. Comrades, we were amongst the first political party to thank the people of South Africa who voted in the 2021 municipal elections. We were the first political party to welcome the election result as an expression of the wishes and will of the people, a testament to our maturing democracy. We were the first political party to acknowledge that the 2021 municipal election were not perfect, understanding that it was impossible to have a perfect election organized within such a short space of time. We were also the first political party to call on all political parties to put their ideological and political differences aside and prioritize the delivery of services to our people. We called on all political parties to prioritize delivery of clean, drinkable and dependable water, proper sanitation and reliable electricity. We called on all political parties to sign a pact committing that within the next 5 years, no home or school in South Africa will lack proper sanitation. We made it clear that we are willing to listen and engage with everyone as long as the priority remains our people and restoring their dignity. We made it very clear that we will not compromise on coalitions for positions of power's sake. We said we were willing and prepared to vote for anyone who's committed to giving the people of Hammanskraal water within the first 6 months. We said we were willing and prepared to vote for anyone who had a clear program of action with specific timelines and measurable deliverables. And we said that should any political party not agree with us, we were happy to sit on the opposition benches. We did this because we refused to impose ourselves on the people of South Africa. We accepted that only when our people are ready to embrace our radical policies, we will take full control of these municipalities. We are not guided by uncontrollable ambitions, ego, or hunger for power, especially when it risks compromising the EFF strategic mission. After the 2021 municipal elections, we played a meaningful role in governance in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, taking strategic positions as deputy mayors in municipalities such as Umtlatuze, Utukela, Umtubatua, Nongoma, Amajuba, Denhauser, Mapumulo, and Zululand. Today, this organization has councillors who are members of mayoral committees through political arrangement in the city of Johannesburg, the city of Tshwane, Ekurhuleni, and Nelson Mandela Bay, responsible for public safety, health, environment, and waste, water, electricity, finance, and corporate services. The EFF regional chairperson and councillor in eThekwini is the chairperson of Human Settlement and Engineering Committee in eThekwini municipality. The people of Tshwane, Inamaskral, Soshanguve, Mabopane, and the CBD are enjoying the clean city because of the work of the EFF MMC. The people of Ekurhuleni, in Mooifontein, Tembisa, Winnie Mandela, Vosloorus, Thokoza, Duduza, and Springs witness a citywide cleaning of illegal dumping sites because it is the EFF MMC responsible for environmental resources and waste management who launched Clean Your Kasi Manje Namhlanje campaign. The people of Johannesburg, Soweto, Alexandra, Diepsloot, Hillbrow, Newtown, and Braamfontein are beginning to witness metropolis visibility because it is the EFF MMC responsible for public safety who, through his campaign, Operation Noma Kanjani, Manje Namhlanje, has deployed boots on the ground. The people of Nelson Mandela Bay in Walma Ward 4 have electricity today because it was an EFF MMC of electricity and energy who responded to complaints when the area did not have electricity in a long time because of a damaged cable. Today, it is because of the chairperson of Human Settlement Committee in eThekwini that the people of Umlazi and KwaMakhuta have moved from hostels to newly built houses and have seen hostels converted into family units, restoring their dignity. It is through this deployment that our organization is at the forefront of service delivery. The EFF is no longer just a government in waiting. We are in government. Our councillors are chairs of strategic committees in many municipal councils. They are chairs of chairs, chairpersons of municipal public account committees, whips of councils, speakers of municipal councils, including being the speaker of Ekurhuleni Metropolitan Municipal Council. We have a solid governance experience. The people of Tshwane are enjoying exemplary government under the leadership of the EFF, with visible service delivery and hands-on governance that directly addresses the needs of the people. However, the people of Johannesburg are being denied the same experience because EFF is deliberately excluded from strategic portfolios that will bring our MMCs into direct and daily contact with the communities to resolve the service delivery challenges. Comrades, we want that while we accept that revolution is about longevity, it is not a sprint but a marathon, a long-distance marathon. There will be an intensive campaign by the white establishment to prevent the EFF from ascending to state power. I must drink water. Cheers. Cheers. The white capitalist establishment knows that the fight for state and economic power in South Africa is between the EFF and the neoliberal forces, no one else. When it became clear that the former liberation movement was going to lose its majority